This week I want to talk about social transitioning, which has been, I think, one of the things that I've had a lot of experience with. As far as like meeting new people, it's kind of hard because you have to decide like really quickly whether or not um, it's really worth it to go into like this whole like in-depth thing, because 9 times out of 10 I've told people, I'm non-binary, and then they ask me like, what is that? Or they'll start being like, well, what kind of like genitals do you have? Or are you gonna get surgery? Or have you had surgery? And it's really like, I don't want to say triggering, but I get dysphoric when people bring up stuff like that. And if it's not dysphoric, it's like, at least I get angry immediately. But at worst I'll get dysphoric. And I feel like people just the general population, they don't understand how to be sensitive and how to just go along with things, and they feel like they're entitled to know every detail about my body, like especially if we just met, which is um, obviously it doesn't feel good at all. So I have to decide really really quickly, like whether or not it's worth coming out to this person or that person. And then if I get a bad reaction, I have to decide, okay, do I just cut this person off? Do I give them some slack? Do I forgive this or do I forgive that? And it really pushes up against like self-respect and um, having like thick skin. It's harder they when they're not trying to be offensive, but they're being offensive anyway, and they're saying really really mean things, and they don't see it as mean, but to me it's really bad, and I don't want to offend them by saying stop saying that, because it's annoying or it's ugly to hear. So it's hard finding a middle ground with a lot of cis people. But like for other, at least queer folks in general, it's easy. One time I went on a date with this girl, and I I just told her, I was like, oh, I'm non-binary, and I said I use these pronouns, and then she was like, oh, okay, cool. And it was like the easiest thing ever. And I asked her, I said, do you know what that means? And she said, yeah. And there was no questions about, like my body or about like really personal things. She just like rolled with it, and it was fantastic. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't like that. Or if I date cis boys, they're very closed-minded, and I think it's because there's that whole like homophobic aspect of it. If they're not dating a girl, they get really freaked out. If they can't call me their girlfriend, they get really like weirded out by it. But I understand that it could be hard for them. But you think that you're straight, or you say that you're straight, and you believe that you're straight, and then you meet someone who like kind of not confuses you. I'm not saying that I'm like some catalyst for change um, as far as their sexuality goes. I'm just saying, like, I feel like a lot of people would be more open to non-binary identities if they just really had a sincere grasp of what it means. And I think that people in general just really don't. They hear like trans and they think the worst. They think the most perverse thing that they can think of, and they they just have like really violent transphobic thoughts, and then they vocalize it in a really really abusive way. As far as like the rest, other than like dating, I've had a really good experience, I think, with my friends and with the people that I talk to in a platonic way, only because if someone doesn't react well to me telling them that I'm non-binary and they're just my friend, uh, I'll I'll try to explain it. But if they're just being really hard-headed about it and they don't want to accept it at all, like I'll just stop talking to them. And I know that's a privilege that I have, like to just cut people off like that, because I know a lot of times you just can't do that. But I'm lucky enough to have close friends that are like really open-minded and really just really loving. And I think that it's hard for people to put love first in relationships, and I'm not talking about just romantic relationships, but like relationships in general, like even with like a stranger on the street, like the first thing that you want to put is judgment, or you want to project your own ideas of femininity, masculinity, gender, sexuality onto like random people that you meet for like 5 minutes. And that's just so obnoxious to deal with as somebody who doesn't really fit any of those traditional molds. I'm always having to explain myself or to like backtrack or to like tell them, you're living in this really small world and you're really not, you're hurting people around you, but you're also hurting yourself because you could grow so much and you're cheating yourself out of that. And a lot of people obviously don't like to hear that that their idea of gender is wrong. Cis feelings and cis comfort is not really a priority at all, and it's not something that I think I'll ever really care about a lot. I know a lot of people have like a really, really tough time just starting the conversation or just getting it out there, like, hey, you know what? There's this thing you might not know about, but not everybody identifies as a boy or a girl, and gender is this big, wide range of experiences that you can't even grasp the whole thing as a cis person, as a trans person, or any kind of person. It's just so wide and so expansive that you just really have to get comfortable with the idea that you're not going to understand everybody. You're going to meet people who experience gender in vastly different ways than you've experienced gender. Opening up yourself and like sitting down with the person or writing them a note or calling them on the phone, it can be really, really, really scary because at the end of the day, we can be really close to people, but we are not going to be inside their head, and we don't know exactly how they're going to react to certain things, and we don't know what kind of words like trigger a certain response from them. So what I found is like I really just say it. I kind of gauge. I'll wait a few days, or like from first meeting somebody, I'll wait a few days to see their general like their personality, if they make fun of people or if they're sexist or transphobic or anything like that. And if they are, I'm just gonna, I'll move on. But if they're nice and they seem like understanding enough, I'll just come out with it. But I'll wait for an opportunity. Like I'll wait for them to use the wrong pronouns for me, or I'll wait for them to call me a girl or something like that. And then I'll try to do it as casually as I can because I want to kind of set the mood for like, oh, this is a thing that's not a super big deal, and this is not something that we have to really dwell on forever. I'll just say like, oh, hey, just a heads up, I don't use those pronouns, or I don't like being called a girl because I'm not one, and I'll leave it at that, and then I'll wait for them to say, oh, what are you, like how can I fix that, and I'll tell them what to use, and then if they have more questions, I'll go ahead and answer them. It gets exhausting to like constantly have to come out to people. When you come out the first time, like when you decide like, oh, this is my gender experience and I'm gonna go ahead and tell everybody about it. The first step of coming out to like everybody, that's so scary, and it's such a huge step. But I think that it's also scary to like constantly, I guess forever, as long as you're alive, you have to just come out again and again and again and again, and it's always new because you know you're always meeting new people, and you always have to say it to somebody else. Coming out to someone new is like, you can't really predict what's going to happen. I guess sometimes I don't do it. I back to dating cis people as a non-binary person. You have to be sympathetic towards this person not understanding because it says the most about me, but it also like it reflects on them, and I think they have to get comfortable, like especially if they're straight, they have to be like, oh, I'm dating a person who's not the gender that I thought that they were or that I'm usually attracted to. So how do I like come to peace with this in my mind? And I know that especially for me, there have been some straight cis boys that I've dated who have been really like they really had a lot of trouble with it, and they just, in the end, they never really like found their own peace with that, because I think at the end of the day there's like a bigger battle. It's like, yes, I'm non-binary, and yes, like there's this like tiny like finite relationship that people can have with each other, but the overarching themes are like homophobia, sexism, um, general ignorance, intimidation of sexuality, and being afraid that they're going to find something out about themselves that they didn't like or that they are ashamed of. I think it's really sad because I see all these people or all these boys that interact with me in a romantic or a sexual way, and they I can tell that they're struggling with this thing that I kind of put to rest a long time ago when I realized that I wasn't straight. I just had to stop shaming myself and stop being um, homophobic, which took a long time, and it took a lot of growth and a lot of like, it took probably a few years to kind of come out of that, to be like a person that doesn't shame any sort of sex anymore. But to be a straight cis boy who's like in this hyper masculine environment with like all their cis boyfriends, having to say to your friend like, oh, I'm dating someone but it's not a girl, but I'm not gay, but I don't know what I am, like that's, I mean, I can sympathize because it's not exactly a loving environment that they've cultivated for themselves, but at the same time it's like, it's not my fault, and it's I feel like a lot of times they lash out and they like project their insecurities onto the nearest person who's queer or the person who's making them have these thoughts that they're uncomfortable with, which is me. As far as like dating goes, I think that's the hardest part. I can come out to like friends easy, or like possible friends. I just, because I'm not really invested at all, like like with casual friendships, especially like with new people that I don't know yet. I'm not going to be too preoccupied with what they think of me. But when it comes to like romantic relationships, it's definitely harder and it's scarier because um, I guess the principle of it, I have to invest more emotional and mental effort. And in the end, if someone's gonna like be uncomfortable with my gender, it's really hard. So yeah, as far as that part of transitioning, I haven't had the best experience, but I've had enough to know um, my own kind of rules and what I'll accept and what I won't accept as far as language or like general feelings about my gender. Because, like I said, I can be sympathetic. I feel like I have to be sympathetic towards their own experience, but at the same time, like, if I'm not given that same sympathy, then I'm not really gonna try to continue the relationship. But sometimes it's a tough decision to make. Um, and you ask yourself, would it just be easier if I just pretended, I was cis and I just got misgendered and I just dealt with it because this person is so cool and like they're so funny, except for the gender thing, like except they don't really like respect my gender. So that's like a thing I struggle with sometimes. But at the end of the day, I always try to make the best decision for my safety and for my mental health and for my emotional well-being and my mental well-being, which is not always the easiest one, but I try really hard to make the right decision. And I think that's all I have to say about social transitioning.